Alright, we are rolling. Oh, shit.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Evening, everybody. Hey, Chris. Hey, Timothy, Mona, Carol, and Evelyn. Hey, everybody. Evening, Bob. Evening, Eileen. Hey, Jean. Hey, Betsy. Hey, everybody. Timothy. Hey, Jerry, Susan, Julianne. Hey, everybody. Hey, Rodney, Jerry. Hey, Donald. Going all right. Glad to have you back. We're here all the time. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Gladys. Cindy in Detroit. Hey, Diane. Hey, Rob. Hey, Godleen. Hey, Katie. I do try to stay current. There's one of those jokes that we'll watch on the replay later. Like, what was that referring to it again? Octavio, I did. Rodney, I am drinking a little bit of rock and rye tonight. Just a little bit. Have a cup of rock and rye. Hey, Megan. Hey, Debbie. Hey, Karen. Hey, everybody. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Janine. Hey, Cindy. Evening, everybody. Hey, Mary Jo and Bridget. Second single shot, good news. Hey, Shelby. Hey, Gary. Who else is in the house here? We got Miles. Miles is very popular on a live stream with the Peak team that's going to start handling my ticketing henceforth. Hey, Christy. Is the mugshot where it looks like a lizard guy real? That first one was going around with the it was much darker and less overexposed than most of the Fulton County mugshots. It was clearly not. The other one that CNN put up where it looks like a lizard. Like somebody fed him after midnight. Evening, Beth. It's always midnight somewhere. Maine South 55-year reunion today. Okay. Hey, Mom. Hey, Steven. Yeah, I also question whether they would allow him to have a lapel pin, plus his hair looks too yellow, etc., in that first one. But the real one, it looks like really makes you think there's something to this lizard guy thing, you know. Shape-shifting reptiles. Those would be missing it. Yeah. Fed after midnight. Hey, Gwendolyn.
Music by Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Yeah, the fake one was better. Or it looked better in it. Hey, Grandma Bell. Oh, hey, we got Priya's down below here, too. Priya, you want to say hi? Quite a nice, cool spot, I guess. Yeah, Carol, we got it. Jeez, he looks worse than Capone in his Atlanta mugshot. Hey, Grace. Hey, evening, everybody. Yeah, my shirt kind of unbuttoned tonight. Hey, Lisa. We'll give it a moment here. The hour of the glower. Not a lot of pictures where the guy looks good. Let's be real here. The camera does not love the man. This is just his usual resting dick face. But honestly, Capone looks better in his Atlanta mugshot. We can compare them side by side here. 98 years in the different. The weight would be about as realistic. Peggy, I am having, Marita, I am having some rock and rye. Peggy, welcome back. Hey, Barb. Oh, yeah, we don't want people fighting on the Mysterium page. There's lots of other pages where you can do that stuff. And get them all in my comments, you know. But if people start to fight on here, I'll just kick them out. I'll kick out the side I don't like anyway. This is not a democracy in here. I run this page. Oh, Debbie, that really sucks. We had one of our AC units went out yesterday. It's fixed now. Hey, Linda in LaSalle. And then Eleanor. Yeah, we had 3 fuses worth of stuff blow out yesterday. We could get them fixed for a while. All the cats are just trying to stay cool up here. Miles is hanging out up on the shelves, all stretched out. Big stretch. Eleanor, I honestly didn't. I can't really think that far ahead. I picked it earlier in the week, but we didn't know it was going to happen the night when I picked it. But luckily, I did manage to get the opening picture up real early. Rodney, that's likely it, but the weird thing is the microwave is what overdid it. It's not on anywhere near the same circuit as the living room. It's clear on the other side of the house. But nobody really understands how electricity works. What am I, Ben Franklin? That wouldn't have been possible on Capone. It's not possible on Donnie either. I love that the channel I was watching decided not to broadcast his talk. As Bob's from a very, very hot climate, he's used to this kind of stuff. We're going to let Benny Goodman finish up this song with Helen Ward. And then we'll get going. Yeah, 2:15. Well, he does kind of look like he's really sucking it in here, you know. Trying to move my head around to get it right. I'm bad at that. It's one of those things like dance instructions or yoga instructions. Just can't process it.
And again, Benny Goodman presents his lady of song, Helen Ward, singing Alone.
All right. Time that we got started with this program, everybody. So enough with the jokes, but boy, did I get that up there fast. So welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I have been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years. Authors of such books as Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, Mysterious Chicago, The Book, Murder Maps USA from Thames and Hudson, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets from University of Illinois Press, and the Ghosts of Chicago book, which you can now get once again. It is back in print, back up on Kindle, thanks to everybody who has put in who has put in an order for it already. Some of you already have your copies. That's amazing to me. But speaking of amazing, I also want to give a shout out here to everybody who has reached out to Georgie, one of our regular Mysterians, while she is in the hospital. I know that she really appreciates all the outpouring. Her parents were just amazed by how much support she's getting from the Mysterians. She reached out to me today and wanted to extend a thanks to everybody out there. So everybody, thanks. Keep sending the good vibes. We send good vibes to everybody around here, but we know that Georgie needs them right now. Don't we, Miles? Isn't that correct? So you concentrate real hard. That sneers how cats send good vibes. Sometimes, I think. Also, while I got the bigger window up, here's Priya. You don't see Priya quite as often around here. Sitting there with two of my shoes that I didn't put away in time to get started. So I'm amazed so many people already have copies of the new Ghost of Chicago book. I just had that listed on Amazon for print like Saturday or Sunday. And Tuesday, people were getting copies. Just amazing. So thanks to everybody for that. Today we are going to be talking about old-time Chicago gangsters. Of course, Uncle Al, shown here weighing all of 6'3", 215 pounds with strawberry blonde hair. Sheer. But it's a very difficult subject to talk about, really, because people get very attached to legends of how Al Capone was in every single building in Chicago, and not just in Chicago, but there is hardly a small town in the United States of America or Canada that doesn't have some story about how Capone had a hideout or a resort there, or something like that. It's something every Chicago tour guide deals with, is after the tour, people come up and say, oh yeah, I'm from Tampon, Iowa. I'm sure you know all about that. That's where Capone had his resort. And it's some town we've never, ever heard of and could never connect Capone to. The guy was just everywhere, it seems. And then after I do these tours, I tend to have a lot of people trying to tell me their stories. So it's not always the longest post-tour hangout. I kind of have to flee as the car barn bandits tried to do. We're going to go back to the early 20th century, about 15, 20 years before Capone's rise to power. There's a group called the Car Barn Bandits who found out that it's a lot easier to rob trains after they've already been parked, after they have been put away in the barns and the garages with all of the money still intact. In the very early 20th century, these guys terrorized Chicago for a while. They ran off on violent sprees. You could look at them either as the last of the Wild West outlaws or the first of the organized crime in Chicago. I've made that comparison a while ago. It's been reprinted in other people's books. But it's also kind of an obvious comparison to make, so I don't make too much of a deal. But here they were, Marks, Van Deen, Niedermeyer, and Risky. I know one guy who's been working on a book about these guys for quite a long time. I'm really looking forward to it when it comes out. They were eventually captured with help from Officer Blowell, who comes up quite a lot around here. Officer Blowell loved to tell ghost stories. And his ghost stories tended to be absolutely ridiculous, which makes things even better. He is the main source for the ghost haunting the basement of the old Lutgert sausage factory. He had a whole story about how the ghost chased him down around the basement one time and like somebody crashed their head right through a window. Very Three Stooges. And also of the Sombrero Man ghost that he claimed to have shootouts with in Lincoln Park. Officer Blau loved a good ghost story. We actually found his grave one time for Find a Grave Friday out in St. Lucas. So, we're going to move up a little bit closer, inch our way a little bit closer up through the years of Chicago gangs. Now, at the time, the early 20th century, what you'd usually hear about with gang activity was the Black Hand. People were just getting all these fantastic ideas in their heads about Irish gang. And not so much Irish gangs at the time as Italian ones. Italy, you got to realize, had been led by like puppet rulers and weak states for a long time. People were kind of used to taking the law into their own hands and distrusting authority in Italy after decades of this sort of thing. When they got to the United States, there got to be all these legends, but also there were a lot of extortion groups, people who would send letters saying, "Congratulations on your purchase of the building. Please leave us some money or we'll blow it up. Sincerely, the Black Hand." There wasn't just one Black Hand group, it was really a lot of groups that just kind of all operate under the same name. But a lot of these guys who became safecrackers and robbers and pickpockets and just general thieves started drifting towards being more organized in the 1910s. One of the first real examples we see of it took place right over across the street from here, right at what is now Millennium Park, when the Illinois Central train station was there. One day that train station was robbed. A car pulled up with a bunch of guys, including Terrible Tommy O'Connor and Bugs Moran, and they busted right into this place to rob the Illinois Central. They killed a guy who was walking around with the payroll. One of them was killed in the process, and 3 other people were hurt. This was a very big story. For about 3 or 4 days, the cops chased these guys around, trying to get a hold of them. Bugs Moran would go on to be one of the biggest gangsters on the north side. Eventually, Terrible Tommy O'Connor was caught quite a bit later for several other crimes, but then broke out of the old jail, which would have been behind the courthouse, which still stands here in River North. One of the people who broke out with them, among the people who broke out with them, there was a few different people. There was Lloyd Bopp. We're going back a little bit further here. This is Earl Deere, one of our other early 1910s gangsters, one of the first guys who actually met Dean O'Banion, who would later be the head of the North Side. Busted out along with Lloyd Bopp, Big Joe Moran, and Frank McErlin. Frank McErlin was later be known as the first guy in Chicago gangland to use a Tommy gun. Now, years and years later, they found him at 78th and Crandon on the south side, just shooting his Tommy gun down the street, and believing that he was shooting at all the ghosts of the people that he had killed. Or so the story went. I very much doubt that they got a really good quote on him about that. But just moving up just on the edge of things, we're going to go down to what is now Chinatown. And here on 22nd Place, right about where this building is now. The newspapers never seemed, even the court records are kind of unclear on exactly which building this was in, but approximately one of these on 22nd Place was a pool hall operated by a guy by the name of Sam Cardinella. Now, Sam Cardinella, according to the papers, was like a guy who had read Oliver Twist and thought it was a how-to manual. He was operating this pool hall. He would lure young boys and teenagers into the place and then convince them that he had some kind of supernatural power over them and talked them into learning to commit crimes. He would teach them all of the ins and outs of robbing people, then send them out to actually do that. When the cops finally caught up with them, they confessed to something like 400 holdups and quite a number of robberies, too. Nicholas the choir singer Viana said that he walked into Sam Cardinella's pool hall on the way to choir practice one day, and a week later he committed his first murder. Now, he was kind of lying. Nicholas the choir singer Viana had been killing people since well before Sam Cardinella's pool hall even opened. But that ended up getting repeated and repeated and repeated. I found out there was really quite a bit of differences in the story when I went through all the paperwork down at the legal archives in Springfield. That had all kinds of interesting stuff, especially in the clemency file. People tried to get Sam Cardinella off the hook. He was sentenced to be hanged. But it became fairly clear, and here's this is as close as we get to his signature. He signed with an X. So they just put his mark and Sam Cardinella. But it became fairly clear that he was more the fall guy than anything else. I wouldn't say that the guy was exactly innocent, but the whole idea of him being a giant mastermind was something the cops kind of cooked up. They were out really going after pool halls that year. They really wanted to hold him up as an example. There were plenty of people who were involved in jail with the rest of the gangsters who testified that they've been saying, "Can you believe it? They want me to say that that boob who doesn't even speak English was some kind of criminal mastermind?" But there were several hundred pages of signatures. These probably would have been set out at Union Siciliana meetings of people saying that his sentence should be commuted if not actually pardoned. And here's the cool thing is digging through these signatures, I found quite a number of actual gangsters, people who would go on to be gangsters later in the 1920s. Like scrolling down here, like Joe Aiello is in there. I still haven't really gone through. But these seem to be grouped. They're not in alphabetical order or anything. They seem to be grouped kind of by neighborhood. If you look over at their addresses, the addresses aren't like door to door, or sequential, but they're all kind of clustered in the same area. So I think these were probably set out at neighborhood meetings. And possibly the Union Siciliana, which was originally a civic organization that over the course of the 20s became more of a front for the mafia. I would connect it to that because one of the people running the campaign to get Sam Cardinella freed was a guy by the name of Mike Merlot, the head of the Union Siciliana, who, when the gangs really started, when the Prohibition started and the gangs grew in power, didn't want any killings. It was largely because of him that for the first few years of the 1920s, the gangs weren't really that violent, at least with each other. We're going to check out one other guy. One other just while I'm on the deck here. When Prohibition got started, one of the first guys to really openly violate it, and no one wanted to mess with the guy over it, was the guy who owned this mansion down on Garfield Boulevard, Big Jim O'Leary, perhaps best known as the son of Mrs. O'Leary, in whose barn the Great Chicago Fire started. And you can see here, you can see his initials there, J-O-L. Still on the building. It's been for sale for a while now. But they want people to say it's Mrs. O'Leary's mansion. They seem to be very leery of letting historians in. A few people have tried to get me into here. But up here, very interesting, there's this one little touch. This woman's face carved in that is said to be Mrs. O'Leary. If so, that's the only actual image we have of her. But one of the people he would have known pretty well, Big Jim being a gambler for the most part, but also a saloon keeper, who pretty openly violated Prohibition once that got started in the early 20s. One guy he would have known was a guy who had a place right up about here where Tommy Gunn's garage used to be, right near the White Castle. Big Jim Colosimo's restaurant was right about here. Big Jim, whose grave we are going to be seeing this weekend at the Oakwood Cemetery tour, shameless plug right there, was really the head of Chicago Vice for a period around here about the 1910s. If you were operating a brothel or a numbers racket or anything like that, you were probably paying off Big Jim. But then Prohibition came around, and they say that he got everybody together and said, listen, I know you all want to do bootleg liquor, but we're not going to do that in Chicago. These are going to be federal agents, not local agents. They're a lot harder to bribe and deal with. Also, I just married one of my chorus girls. She wants me to straighten up and fly right. So, we'll still do the brothels, we'll still do the gambling, but none of the Prohibition stuff, none of the bootleg liquor in my town. He was shot to death shortly after saying that, and whether he really even said that or not, it's kind of based on word of mouth from people we can't necessarily trust. But he was shot to death right in his cafe. The assailant is not officially known. The story has always been that they brought in Frankie Yale, who was the boss of young Al Capone out in New York. It's not the kind of thing Frankie Yale wouldn't have done. He was a little high up the ladder, I think, to do it at that time, but they say he just kind of liked doing that stuff. So, stepping into his shoes as head of the Chicago Vice Ring, John Torrio, Johnny the Fox, he was occasionally called. John Torrio, there was like another weird nickname for him that I saw, like the Schnoz or something like that. Something silly like that. But he was brought in along with young Lieutenant Al Capone, took over everything and said, listen, we are in fact absolutely going to do prohibition and break the prohibition rules here. We're going to make all kinds of bootleg liquor. What we're not going to do is fight. We will divide the city up into territories. You take yours, we'll take ours. No need to fight. There's going to be plenty of money for everyone. That actually worked out reasonably well for a few years there. But his young lieutenant, Al Capone, was still a little bit wet behind the ears. Torrio was the guy who taught Capone to say, we don't want any trouble, instead of, are you looking for trouble? Capone first made the news in late 1922 when he was caught driving drunk down here on Randolph Street. Right down this stretch of road. Crashed his car into a parked taxi cab. Then jumped out, started waving a gun around, threatening to shoot anybody who said that it was his fault. He was brought to the police station shouting, don't you know who I am? I'm going to have every one of you fired. I'm 6'3" and I weigh 215 pounds. He probably said that anyway. So he would have been taken to the police station that was right in the old city hall. So this is one place we can actually trace Al Capone. He's said to have been in every building. One guy once bet me $500 that he owned the merchandise mart. I didn't make him pay up, and I really should have. But this is the city hall that was built in 1911, so this would have been the place where they took him. And these are really generally the kinds of places we can actually trace Al Capone around Chicago. For instance, right around the corner here, I'll speed this walk up a little. We've already seen a little bit of the criminal court building. He took a meeting in a couple of lawyers' offices in here. This is actually a picture of him inside the criminal court building after his brother Frank Capone was shot. He went in here and took a meeting and told what he knew, or probably didn't really tell that much of what he knew. But over time, he was operating a place called the Four Deuces. He kind of grew and started being connected to more crime. The head of the North Side mob was a guy named Dino Banyan, who employed a guy named John Duffy, who was supposed to be his hitman. But then he never actually shot anybody, so finally they had John Duffy bumped off in what was called the first one-way ride. They took him for a ride, then ended up throwing his body out. They'd arranged to have him picked up right outside of Capone's place. So Capone was then going by Alphonse Scarface Capone, also known as Al Brown. Brown said he knew O'Banion, but denied knowing Duffy. He said, I'm just a businessman. But for no reason at all, everybody's always trying to drag me into something. But the Four Deuces would have been right in this space that we already passed. It would have been like right across the street and down the block from Colosimo's place. And it looked about like this at the time. Here's how it looked back in the 60s before they tore it down. And I've got some junk from the rubble of the place that might be original from it. We couldn't figure out what the hell the thing was. But we excavated, did a little bit of excavating in the vacant lot where it used to stand one time. Found some interesting stuff. I'll find what the hell I did with it eventually. I think it's down in the basement. But denied rumors that he had been shot to death. And continued to be questioned as manager of the Four Deuces, known as a procurer all his life. Always cheating between raids. But probably was not, in fact, the killer of Duffy. They probably arranged to have him picked up outside of the Four Deuces so it would look like he was. But it didn't quite work out. So they went back and forth. O'Banion and Torrio went back and forth for a while, but as long as Mike Merlot was alive, they couldn't really do anything. O'Banion, as his day job, operated Schofield's flower shop right across from Holy Name Cathedral, right where they were building the 111 Chicago building when I filmed this. I should really refilm this one now that it's actually been filmed. But Dino Banyan got his start as a singing waiter in the McGovern Brothers Tavern. Really impressed Earl Deere, one of the early gangsters, with his arrangement of... What was the song? I think it was like Rosie Gal or something. But as many times as he screwed Torrio over, Torrio started saying, forget my rules, let's get rid of this guy. But then Mike Merlot would say nope, and that would be it. You didn't go against Mike Merlot. Until Mike Merlot died. This is the view outside of his house. I think the house is still there. It's down in the Lincoln Park area. But this was kind of the beginning of an era. It started with Colosimo, at least, that gangster funerals were a really big deal. Especially if you were buying from Schofield's Flowers. So here's Mike Merlot at Mount Carmel Cemetery. Pretty much all of these guys ended up in Mount Carmel Cemetery. There were always stories that, oh, they were really devout Catholics. They always carried a prayer book with them everywhere. I kind of ain't buying it personally. But it was generally thought among the gangsters, we don't really know who the shooters were, once again, but it was generally believed that it may have been the Jenna brothers who operated out of Little Italy, as seen over here, who came into Schofield's Flowers and shot Dean O'Banion to death. Now, they came in looking like they were buying flowers for Mike Merlot's funeral, and that was O'Banion's last words, "You boys here for Merlot?" And then they gave him what was once called the Chicago handshake. Grab his hand, pull forward, stick a gun in his guts, and fire. Now the Chicago handshake, of course, is a can of Old Style and a shot of Malort. He is actually not very far now from Mike Merlot over at Mount Carmel Cemetery. The O'Banion marker. And immediately in the articles about him on the occasion of his death, they were already kind of lionizing these guys. O'Banion gang like pirates of olden days, beer trucks their gold ships. And after this, all hell broke loose with the shootings. Everybody was shooting everybody now. I think part of it was really that these guys were old safecrackers and robbers and bank robbers. And just driving beer trucks around, frankly, just wasn't exciting enough for them. They were almost operating this stuff as a legitimate business. Al denied rumors that he was shot to death. Greatly exaggerated, he said. Interesting that he knew that quote. And then about a year later, Revenge was taken. Well, we couldn't get ahead of ourselves here, but right across the street. Let me move up and then move back. Maybe I did this initially. In Revenge, 3 guys, Jaime Weiss, Bugs Moran, and Vinny the Schemer Drucci, who kind of jointly took over for O'Banion at the time, came up to John Torrio at his house here on South Clyde Street, 7011 South Clyde. As he was getting out of the car, walking up towards the vestibule here, they shot him several times, including in the face. Now, almost miraculously, he didn't die. Apparently, they came up to give him the last shot, and he just didn't make it. And the gun was out of bullets or something. But Jaime Weiss became kind of the nominal head. We'll move back over here a little bit. So Jaime Weiss ended up being killed right across the street from Holy Name Cathedral. Shot in a whole thing. W.W. O'Brien, the lawyer, was also there. He's the inspiration for the lawyer in the musical Chicago. Now, Gangster Tour after Gangster Tour will tell you that this little hole in the cornerstone of Holy Name Cathedral is a bullet hole. It is absolutely not a bullet hole. This is where it used to be for holding up a plaque years and years ago. But if you look around this vicinity a little bit, you can see like where lettering is cut off, where they had to rebuild the stairs to cover up some of the damage. That much you can see. So Jaime Weiss is now also at Mount Carmel Cemetery. Vinny the Schemer Drucci, one of the guys with him, got his name the Schemer because he was always coming up with plans like, hey, why don't we go to London and steal the crown jewels? Why don't we run on one of our guys for mayor? Eventually, he was shot by the cops. The cops said he was reaching for the police officer's gun. Nobody exactly believed that, but nobody was particularly sad to be rid of Vinny the Schemer Drucci either. This is under his real name, D'Ambrosio. And once again, Capone is said to have been everywhere. The main place we can really reliably trace him to is down here in the 7200 block of South Prairie. There's one house that doesn't quite seem like it fits in with the others. This is the old Capone house, still standing. Comes up for sale every now and then. And here you can see an original picture of it. Covered up in flowers for Frank Capone's funeral. So again, they really went nuts with the flowers. You can definitely see the building next door is the same. It's a different angle, but clearly the same house. So Torrio wisely decided that he was going to retire at that point, turned everything over to Al Capone. Capone was again brought in for questioning at City Hall after one of the other killings, after a guy by the name of McSwiggan, who was an up-and-coming rising young lawyer, because known as just as clean as they get. But then one day he was out with the O'Donnell brothers gang and was shot to death by Capone men, possibly by Capone himself. This was the biggest problem. Raids after this uncovered some of Capone's bank books, which would eventually get him in real trouble. Around this time, this picture was taken of Al Capone at the ripe old age of 26. And here's our old pal, Detective Sergeant John W. Norton, in one of the post-McSwiggan killing raids, went to Ralph Capone's house and found that he was using like rifles as curtain rods. There was stuff hidden in the stair banisters, secret compartments all over the place. You gotta wonder if while he was making that raid, he flashed back to 31 years ago then, when he was working on the raids going into the H.H. Holmes Castle building. He was one of the lead detectives on that job. Continuing moving on through the 1920s, there's really just a whole lot of assassination through the 1920s. This is the Chase Tower now here at Madison and Dearborn. But for a while there, being the head of the Union Siciliana became one of the most powerful positions anywhere, but it also made you a target. One after another, guys took control of the Union Siciliana and were promptly assassinated. One guy was expected to act kind of like a stooge for Capone, who, not being Sicilian, could not be the head of it himself. It's a guy by the name of Tony Lombardo, who was shot to death right here in front of where the Chase Tower is now. It was right in the middle of the day. Very public hit. And he is also at Mount Carmel Cemetery. And after all this, after all the feds started squeezing in on Capone, he fairly publicly announced that he was just going to leave town. You can all go thirsty, is Al Capone's adieu. Big-hearted Al's adieu. See, I had this up way back when I was with Weird Chicago. I still got the watermark on there. I know he didn't properly hold a press conference or anything. He just spoke to one reporter at a time. In movies, he's always doing press conferences. Last TV show I filmed about, and they kept wanting me to talk about his press conference. He couldn't do things like that. He couldn't go to theaters. He couldn't hang out in ballrooms. He couldn't hang out in nightclubs because too many people wanted to kill him. At least at this point. Later on, he was able to venture out to football games and some racetracks and stuff, but he had to be really very careful. He spent most of his time ducking in through the side entrance of really B-list hotels. But after just about a year or so in power in Chicago, he headed down to Miami, built himself an estate there. Early 1929 came the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. 2100 block of North Clark Street. There was a garage right where this damp little vacant lot is now. So Valentine's Day of 29, by this time Bugs Moran was in charge of the North Side. He wasn't the most capable leader in the world, but all the more capable ones had been shot. So apparently word got around that some kind of shipment was going to happen. Something demanded his attention to this little garage that they used. So Valentine's Day in 1929, 5 guys from his gang, plus 1 mechanic and 1 hanger-on, were gathered in this little garage, the SMC Cartage Company. Moran himself was not there yet. But a stolen police squad car drove down Clark Street and parked outside. 2 guys in plain clothes and 2 guys dressed as cops walked inside of the place. At this point, the details get a little bit fuzzy. We know they lined all of them up against the north wall. At this point, they probably said something like, "All right, which one of you mugs is Bugs Moran?" But since Moran wasn't there yet, nobody said anything. So they just shot all 7 of them. Very graphic images. Brains next to people's hats. This was the Chicago Daily News the next day. Victims are lined against the wall. 1 volley kills all. Killing scene too gruesome for onlookers. I was saying something. And then one of the others, the Herald Examiner said, Capone rises to supreme command in Underworld. Capone himself was conveniently down in Florida at the time. Now, it's a given. There are people who say he didn't really have anything to do with this. It's generally assumed that he did. Now, there's a lot of different theories. The orthodox solution is that he must have used Machine Gun Jack McGurn, one of his regular guys, but he had a blonde alibi that kept him out of trouble for it. It also could have been Scalisi and Anselmi, a couple of guys that we'll cover in a minute. Also, there's the theory that it was what they called the American Boys. It was a gang from St. Louis. One of their wives called them the American Boys. It's always said that Capone called them that. That wouldn't really make sense. I haven't found an instance where he actually called them that himself. And also, he called himself American. He got mad if people called him Italian. So Bugs Moran became the man who got away. Let's do a quick cemetery run over here. Rose Hill Cemetery, right up by the fence, is one of the graves of Reinhard Schwimmer, who officially was not a gangster. He was just an optometrist who liked hanging out with gangsters. That's according to his mother. So, take that as you will. Also, one guy wasn't quite dead yet, Frank Gusenberg, who looked up and said, "Nobody shot nobody. Nobody got shot here." Among the possible victims, Scalisi and Anselmi. Now, I say this because shooting all 7 of the people, but not the guy they were supposed to be killing, is exactly the kind of boneheaded move that Scalisi and Anselmi might have pulled. And that might explain why they were found by the side of the road, dead and beaten to death with baseball bats. There's a very memorable scene in movies about this, where Capone says, "You all like baseball, don't you?" And then beats them to death. It's often repeated like word for word on gangster tours. It might have been what actually happened. We don't really know. But Reinhardt's mother said, "Always a good boy." Here's Machine Gun McGurn. McGurn himself was generally blamed by the underworld for this. We kind of know this because a few years later, when he was more or less out of work, when Capone was in jail, you couldn't just look under the papers for hitman. He was starting to get threats. His friend said, "You know what, Jack, let's knock it off and just go bowling instead." So they went bowling, and midway through the game, a bunch of guys came in and shot McGurn to death, leaving at his feet a valentine, which read, "You've lost your jewels, you've lost, what is this? Yeah, I made it too small. You've lost your job, you've lost all your jewels, and your handsome houses. But things could still be worse, you know. At least you haven't lost your trousers." We'll also cover, we'll move up here to the north side briefly. This is Joe Aiello's house, up across from Indian Boundary Park. He was always trying to blow Capone up. Didn't work. He eventually got shot further down on the south side. There was also a racketeer. One of the people who made affidavits in the Cardinella clemency file, Big Tim Murphy, who was always trying to organize unions so he could collect all of the dues. And he was shot outside of this house. It's just a regular house now. I'm not going to give the exact address, but it's not far from Joe Aiello's. And you can see that one actually is pockmarked by bullet damage. Let's cover a few places we can actually trace Al Capone to around Chicago. There was the Metropole Hotel, which was down here a little further south on Michigan Avenue. Looked about like this. Wasn't one of the fancier hotels. It was one of the B-list hotels where he'd just take up a lot of space. Now, eventually, during his trial in 1931, he took up residence at the Lexington Hotel, which was right about here on Michigan Avenue, the 2000s block. Looked about like this. This is where Geraldo Rivera famously made a complete fool of himself trying to dig into Al Capone's vault. It is also where Frank Lesh of the Secret Six went to visit Capone, said that he had Big Bill Thompson's, the mayor's picture up on the wall. Though every time he told the story, he told it a little bit differently, though. It's widely noted that Al Capone operated a soup kitchen during the Depression, as held up as evidence of the fact that he wasn't really that bad a guy. But that was right there at 935 State Street that we just drove by. But as soon as the economy started to improve, he quit the soup racket. And this, of course, came up during his trial. Like, see, he's not such a bad guy. But by this time, he was spending most of his time down in Florida, away from Chicago. Sissy Patterson granddaughter of Joseph Medill of the Chicago Tribune, eventually was running a paper in D.C. herself, went down to Florida, just happened to find Al Capone outside. Gang lord's eyes impress Eleanor Patterson. And this is the time she asked him, well, why don't you just go back to Italy? And he said, back to Italy? I'm not Italian. I was born in New York City 31 years ago. And she kind of looked at him like, 31? He did not look 31. He looked a great deal older. You can see in the drawing here, you can see the scar on his face that he said he got in World War I. He most certainly did not get it in World War I. He got it in a fight outside of a bar. Now, even when he was back in Chicago, he wasn't as easy to find as people tend to think. There was a whole series in the Des Moines Register. They sent a reporter to try to get a look at Capone. After weeks, he got a quick look at him going into an elevator. But in 1931, they finally did manage to put him on trial. Of course, everybody knows he was on trial for tax evasion. You get him for what you can. And this would have been at the old federal court building, which stood right where this is now. Back behind the Bankers Building, also known as the Clark Adams Building, was the FBI's headquarters in Chicago. But it didn't look like that. At the time, it looked like this. And during the trial, a couple of things came out, a couple of other places we can trace him to. One is that, though he's often said to have been in the dome of the Jewelers Building there, it came out during his trial that he bought all of his underwear here at Marshall Field's. Custom-tailored union suits made out of ladies' glove silk, which the jurors thought was absolutely hilarious, being, old-time people. And also, the Marquette Building just down the block here, Capone would duck into this building during trials to have lunch in his lawyer's office. It's not exactly an exciting story. It's not like not like hanging out at a nightclub or anything. Just a place where he would go to have lunch during the trial. But one other place that I can trace him to is after he was convicted and sent to jail first in Atlanta, he switched trains here at Dearborn Station. I believe it was at Dearborn Station that it is said that this was the only time that he and Elliot Ness, the Untouchables guy, were in the same place at the same time. We'll also cover just a bit. I gotta have to cover the Jewelers Building here. Long said to be an Al Capone hangout. They say that under the dome was a place called the Stratosphere Club that Capone either owned or was a patron at. The Stratosphere Club was a real place. But in Capone's day, that dome was just used for storage. They didn't have the Stratosphere Club until well after Capone went to prison, and it wouldn't have been a speakeasy. It was a regular club, a rather expensive one that it took 3 elevators to get up to. It didn't last very long, but we've been there on the virtual time travel pub crawls. Real snob of a bartender at that place. There's also the Green Mill up on North Broadway has had Capone's connection to it has been part of their advertising for years, even though there's absolutely nothing to back it up. But he's also been traced a little bit, by first-hand accounts anyway, to the Sunset Cafe down in Bronzeville. Now, for a while there, this is a beauty shop now. It was a hardware store for a long time. They still got some of the original touches from back when it was a jazz club. For a while, it was the Grand Terrace, shown here with Earl Father Hines, who actually did tell a story about Capone coming into the Sunset Cafe. Here's Earl Father Hines.
Al came in there and one night and called the whole band and show together and said, now, we want to let you know our position. He says, we just want you people to tend to your own business. We'll give you all the protection in the world. He says, we want you to be like the 3 monkeys. You hear nothing, you see nothing, and you say nothing. And that's what we did. And I used to hear many things, many of the things that they were going to do, but I never did tell anyone. And sometimes the police used to come always looking for a fall guy. Used to come in and say, Earl, what were they talking about? I said, I don't know. He said, well, you were sitting right there. I said, yeah, I sit on the bus too, but I don't pay attention to what people are saying. So I said, no, you're not going to pick me, because they had a habit of putting the pictures of these different people that would bring information in the paper. And the next day you find them out there in the lake somewhere, swimming around there with some chains attached to their feet and all that, you know what I mean?
So it seems like a lot of people had stories like this that don't really check out, but I'm not the kind who would argue with Earl Father Hines. But now we'll have to cover. Capone himself is now at Mount Carmel. Now, Genevieve Forbes Herrick, the newspaper reporter, overheard a guy when one of the Jenna brothers was being interred here, saying, well, there's Mr. Jenna, Mike Merlot, and Dino Banyan are right over there. When Judgment Day comes and them tombs open up, there's going to be hell to pay in this cemetery. That was before Capone was there, or any of the other guys. Now, just kind of at random, we have also run into Elliot Ness, who has a cenotaph, at least, at Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland. Now, there was a movement for a while to have a statue of Elliot Ness built in Chicago. Trouble is, most of Elliot Ness's stories were just stories that he told when he was hard up for booze money himself. After Prohibition ended, he went right into drinking himself, told a lot of stories around Cleveland. It's generally agreed among people among the police force in Chicago that he barely ever left his desk. But anyway, that's the story, everybody. So, all right. So, haven't decided what we're going to do next Thursday, but we will be doing something. We are here every Thursday. The thing I really need to plug right now is there are still a few slots left for Oakwood Cemetery. That is coming up this Sunday. Since we postponed it, I gave myself an extra week to make sure I made the tour better than ever, and I found some real interesting rabbit holes that have been keeping me occupied all week when I should really be getting back to the New York Cemetery book. But that's the way these things go. So, all right, Oakwood Cemetery, Sunday, 1 p.m. Be there, be square. It'll be done in time to get up to the free ice cream up at the Glessner House if you're into that sort of thing. And if you are on the Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles fan club group, you already have the links to the Mystericon events, including the boat tour and the bus tours. The bus tours are selling out really fast. Boat tours are going at a pretty good rate as well. Those will all be coming up public in just a couple of weeks, but right now you just got to be one of the Mysterians on the Mystericon group. So, with that, everybody, we will just put the Benny Goodman back on. And just hang out like we always do. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Casey, that is very true. If I retired to Cleveland, what else do I do in Cleveland? Go to the cemetery, mostly. All right, we should have a whole new ticketing program up next week. Your tickets on Eventbrite will certainly still be honored. You're still good there. Yeah, that did seem kind of apropos tonight, didn't it? Now, now and then people from New York will really kind of rip on Chicago saying, if it's after 10 o'clock in Chicago and you haven't eaten, you will die. Because it is hard to find late night dining around Chicago, especially compared to New York. But in Cleveland, you can say the same thing, but make it 7 o'clock. We have the hardest time finding places to eat after like 7 in Cleveland. Yeah, in fact, let's put these things up and compare once again. I mean, I'm going to screenshot this. Hold them up together. Try that again.
And here's another tune that they'll be playing as long as we dance. Stardust.
My head is all over the place today. It's been so many things going on today. Al Capone looks better. Al Capone did not look good. I mean, this is Capone, significantly over a decade younger than I am now. Now, recently, there's a famous quote that one of Capone's guys, while he was in prison, said, "Capone is nuttier than a fruitcake." I've been trying to find the source. I did find Greasy Thumb Guzik said Capone is nuttier than a cuckoo. I think it just got rewritten because, frankly, fruitcakes are supposed to be nutty. I don't really associate cuckoos with nuts, so how nutty is a cuckoo? I'll put that on Blue Sky, too. I keep Twitter, like, hidden way back on my phone now. I got Blue Sky up front.
Helen Ward sings once more. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Well, there's a different version of this song than we usually hear. Do any Capone descendants live in Chicago today? Asked Stephen. Not that I know of. Well, actually, thousands and thousands of people who claim to be. Oh, thanks, Cindy. Susan, I very much doubt it. I really don't think they were gonna, I really don't know why Capone, Geraldo thought he was gonna find anything in that safe. And Deirdre Capone pops up around Chicago a lot. She is like a grandniece. Though her level of memory about the guy seems fairly remarkable given her age. Thanks everybody who's kicking in some donations. That really helps. Really does. Always be yourself, Bob. Cindy Capone, the son. You know what? I'd like to see Geraldo open some more vaults and then lock himself in. Good night, Rob. It is very hot in here, even with the air conditioning going, folks. I feel like I'm getting like a Frankie Avalon helmet hair going. They walk, and I walk. Gina, that's awesome. We'll see you on the boat. We'll see you on the bus. It practically have to feel cooler now than it did a while ago. So much today. So many meetings. Marie, back to the beach, exactly. Tonight, Dick Dale and at least 2 Deltones. Marita, same. It's working hard. It really is. My job is crime. My job is city. It really is. All right, yeah, I don't think we're gonna have to make the second bus tour. Is probably never gonna go private. I think it's gonna sell out, or at least close enough that it'll be just people from the fan club, which is probably the best way to do it. I might rent the bus again for later in the month. In fact, it's going well enough. You guys, you know what? Steven, yes, Capone, as far as is publicly known, never returned to Chicago. There are stories about him doing so, but not well sourced. Never came back to Chicago until he was in a casket. I'm going to move over closer to the air conditioning. Gene, I think there will probably still be a couple of seats left, certainly on the boat. And especially the 8:30 boat has been a slow start. But I maintain my confidence that it's all going to work out. Something will turn up. All right, I'll rent it like last weekend of October or something and run a couple of tours. Maybe try to revamp a little bit so I'm not doing the same stuff that all the other ghost tours in town are doing. But, you know, I know those ones so cold. I know them down. And yeah, if you come on the Rose Hill tour, come about an hour early. Come at 10 o'clock instead of 11. I'll bring Miles by at 10. Then I'll have to rush him back home. But yeah, that is the plan as long as working out with the bus works well. I'll see what I can do. Miles. Had a lot of concert tickets to buy today anyway, so. Probably more next week too. Oh, Benny is wrapped up. We'll just rewind him a little bit. That's a shorter Benny, that episode.
Presenting Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
I believe the Oakwoods tour does start at 1 p.m. If Rose Hill says 1, we gotta fix that. Susan, I don't know for sure next week, but I'm suspecting they're going to add some Dylan New York dates at the Beacon Theater, where he often plays, and where I often see him. So I'll catch the 3 nights in Chicago. Then I need a New York run anyway for the Trinity Churchyard book. Miles is coming here to hang out.
That stands to a half-hour rhythm by Benny Goodman and his orchestra, the Raja Rhythm, playing for you from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Dodging a Divorcee, the first number. Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Yeah, Pat, you should be fine parking inside of the Oakwood gates. Stephen, Benny grew up in Chicago. And this is him live at the Congress Hotel where Mystericon will be this year. Learn to play the clarinet at Hull House. Not Audrey. I know Layla was planning to do that tour for, so there'll be like a lower cost alternative to the boat tour. But she's also talked about, I don't know if she doesn't get enough sign-ups or something, she might move it. Miles is still hanging out over here. I don't see where Lily went. Or, Priya. Lily is probably in Ronnie's office. Lynn, that's especially cruel. Arizona in September. See, when it's September, I don't want it hot anymore. Like, if it's September and I don't get to wear a jacket, I'm mad. Miles is giving us a nice big stretch down here. We're kind of doing the stretch and yawn. I myself, in fact, much do the stretch and yawn. So, in fact, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. One quick plug again. Upcoming on Sunday is going to be Oakwood Cemetery. I have a sneaking suspicion we're going to be there tomorrow for Find a Grave Friday as well. I have to figure out who I'm going to find. But thanks for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stay safe, stay strong, and of course, stay cool, stay hydrated. And if you can still do that and stay spooky, then definitely stay spooky. Have a great night, everybody. 2:15.